Hey kids, we're back with another Wednesday of social studies, and we're going to take a quick leap through time as we look back on the last few lessons that we've had. We started off about some of the things that were leading up to. We still haven't gotten to the actual Civil War yet. We're looking at things that led up to, although some of these people cross across and into the Civil War, but I think it's important that we talk about them now as opposed to later. But we started with Harriet Tubman. And we learned that Harriet Tubman was very, very famous. She grew up as a slave, and she decided that she had had enough, and so she was pretty smart, and she escaped. But that's not where the story ended. When she escaped, she decided she was going to go back and forth, continuing to free slaves. And when she did that, she started what we would call the Underground Railroad. She was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. And we learned that was extremely, extremely important, the way that she did that. She didn't just free herself. She knew that there was something bigger at stake. So she went back and she started to free other slaves as well, starting with her family. Then we went back and we started learning about Dred Scott. And if we looked at Dred Scott, we know that he went through life and he ended up going to court about slavery because he traveled around with a doctor. And when he was in all these different states, some of the states were free states, and he sued. Amazingly, he won, as it says here. Amazingly, he won a lot of the court cases until it went all the way to the Supreme Court, and then that's where it left off. And again, we kind of talked about last time how we think it seems like kind of a terrible ending, but it really did start to change the way people up north started looking at slavery. And it started changing the way that the slaves themselves were looking at how things were going, and it really started to change the course of slavery as it moved on. I don't know why he is in the middle of Harriet, but that's fine. I need to fix that. Let me skip through here. We just talked about Dred Scott. Now today we're going to talk about another very, very famous African American who grew up during this time, and his name is Frederick Douglass. Now, Frederick Douglass was born on a plantation, and if you are born on a plantation, like if your mom and dad were slaves and you were born, you were, from birth, considered a slave. Now, obviously, like a teeny tiny baby can't be doing anything, but the mom still had to work while you were growing up, and it was expected when you became of age that you would also start working. Now, if you look over here at the age of 7, okay, that's a lot younger than you guys. That's just a couple of years after kindergarten here. So we're talking maybe first, second grade here. He was sent to live somewhere else. I just want you to imagine that. You're like a second grader and you've been sent to live somewhere else and work. And you rarely ever see your mom again. I know that many of us can barely make it through the day without our moms. And I can't imagine what we would do if we were sent away somewhere else to work without our moms. Again, I don't think that it's very possible for us to ever fully reach and discuss just how deeply painful it was for the slaves. And we're not talking about just the physical pain of being beaten when they did something that the plantation owners decided they didn't like, no matter what that was. Or if we go back in time and we look, someone else does something that they don't like and they're just trying to prove a point. If we think way back when some of the people were doing those raids, some slaves got killed just to prove a point. Don't start any nonsense on this plantation, which is insane. So it's not only physical pain, but emotional pain that you just can't really comprehend. 7, and then you're sent to live somewhere else. You rarely get to see your mom. And then at 10, which is what some of us are in 5th grade. So in 5th grade, now your mom dies. So you don't have a mom, don't have a dad. And you're just being kind of passed around, again, treated as property. And so here's when he goes to live with this Auld family in Baltimore. Now we keep talking about plantation. And I don't think we've stopped and talked about what exactly a plantation is. A lot of times we just mention that word and move on. I think it's good for us to stop for a few moments and actually speak about this. A plantation is a very, very large farm. I'm talking like a massive farm. And most of these were in the southern colonies. And they had all these different crops: tobacco, cotton, sugar, rice. And these crops that they were growing in the South made a lot of money. So they made a lot of cash. And so what they ended up calling them are cash crops. If you grew something that made a lot of money, it was considered a cash crop. We learned from way back when we first started learning about the 13 colonies that the southern colonies were more of an agricultural society because the farming there was just fantastic. Way up north, pretty terrible. Harsh winters that seemed to last forever, very, very short springs and summers, and the ground was extremely rocky. Down south, you have very mild winters in comparison. The soil is fantastic, and you have very long spring, summers, and even our falls don't get too harsh until probably late November, and that just depends on what year it is. So they had fantastic soil, so they were able to have these farms that were pretty much growing things throughout the entire year, and these cash crops. There was no way for them to do that. They had run it through indentured servants, people that were working towards paying off a debt, but because they were money hungry and greedy and pretty terrible people, they decided, hey, instead of actually giving some people some money, why don't we take people from their land and make them work for free and beat them when they're, we don't like what they're doing. That's not the way to do things, but that's what the plantation owners did, the slave owners. That's what they did. And we need to think about that. Now, when you look in this background here, this is a little misleading. Most of the time, the slaves weren't out there plowing the fields with horses and cows and stuff. They were doing it by hand, which is really rough if you've ever been out into a field. It's tough work when you're plowing a field using like a plow that's drawn by a horse or bulls or something. But to do that with your hands is pretty crazy. That's some back-breaking work. Again, having slaves, because they paid the slaves $0, made owning the plantations even more profitable. And so they made tons of money while not paying these slaves anything and treating them pretty terrible and just treating them as property. The slaves worked up to 18 hours a day. Now you need to think about that. That's like 18 hours a day. Then you get off work, and it's not like you go straight to bed and get 6 hours of sleep. Like somewhere in there, you got to at least get home and take care of the family and say hello to people and then get some rest, and you're back up doing it again for 18 hours the next day. That's a pretty terrible life to live. And imagine, this is what's going on in Frederick's life at this time. When he was 12, the slave owner's wife, Sophia Auld, she taught him the alphabet. Now, as we know, looking back on some of the other people that we've studied, that was against the law. You can't teach slaves to read and write back then. And when her husband found out, he got very angry. And he forbid her from ever doing that again. But Frederick was an extremely bright and intelligent young man, and he picked up on things very, very quickly. So over time, he kind of taught himself how to read and write. He would watch other people reading, he would pick up things, and he started learning to read and write. And as he was learning to read and write, he read newspapers, he read articles, and there were obviously things in there written about slavery. And he was reading the Bible. And he began to think about all of these things that he was reading, and he started formulating in his mind his view on human rights and the way that all people should be treated. So he took that back with him to the plantations, and he actually taught other slaves how to read. Now remember, you weren't supposed to be doing this. Now, if the slave owner's wife did that, she probably got yelled at, and that's about it. He got caught doing this. Now, remember, this is against the law, and he got into a lot of trouble. As a matter of fact, he got him in so much trouble, they moved him to a completely different plantation, and that owner decided, I think I know what I'll do. This guy has a little bit too much spunk. He has too much spirit, and I'm just going to beat him, and if I beat him, that'll break his spirit. He won't do anything like this again. But that didn't work. That actually did the opposite. I think it showed Frederick just how important it was for him to actually learn to continue to read and write, because if it made the owners that afraid and it made them react that way, then he knew that it was most definitely the right thing to be doing. So he decided to keep doing it. So it just strengthened, as it says here, that it strengthened his resolve to continue learning how to read and to gain his freedom. So now he's like, not only am I going to learn how to read, I'm going to gain my freedom now, because I'm not going to put up with this anymore. So much like Harriet and others, he started thinking about ways he can try to escape. So he disguised himself as a sailor, and he carried some papers with him that showed that he was actually a free black man. So he boarded a train. He went north, got up to New York, where he was a free man at this point, because remember that the North was against slavery. He married his first wife, Anna Murray, here, and he took the last name of Douglas. It was here that he started meeting other people that were very like-minded, people that thought very similar to him. They were called abolitionists. What an abolitionist is, and you could almost see the word abolish right there. They were people that wanted to abolish slavery. What that means is they wanted to get rid of slavery. So abolitionists wanted to get rid of slavery. He started to speak and realized he was a really, really good speaker. And he honestly was just telling his story of how he grew up, the things that happened to him as he was growing up. He told stories of what it was like being a slave. Probably things like, hey, at the age of 7, they moved me away from my mom, and that was pretty much the last time I saw her because she died when I was 10. He became very, very famous. But this also, and as you'll see in the video later, it really put him in danger because as people started to talk about him and he became more famous, he started to really worry, like, oh my goodness, like, if these slave owners in the South start to hear about this or see pictures of me in the paper or something, they might come after me, and that could be a very scary time. So to avoid being captured, he actually went overseas. He went to like England and Ireland. But he didn't just go over there and hide. He continued to speak out against slavery while he was over there. And when he was doing all of this and writing these books, he was actually making a lot of money. And he actually came back to the United States and he purchased, even though he was up north, he went this way and he just did it like, I guess, officially, and he bought his freedom. That way he was officially a free man. So the people, he could talk and do whatever he wanted to at this point, and the people in the South couldn't come back and do anything to him because he had purchased his freedom at this point. There are some books, if you look down here, autobiography, The Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, bestseller, probably still on the bestseller list, I'm sure. 2 more stories, My Bondage and My Freedom, and Life and Times of Frederick Douglass. In addition to speaking out for slaves, he didn't just talk about slavery. He really did believe that everyone was equal, and that included women who at the time were not treated as equal. And he really thought that women deserved the right to vote. Now you got to think, this is like extremely like out there thinking compared to what other people thought. Other people thought slavery's great and women don't get to they get to do nothing but stay home. He really did take to heart all of the things that he read and formulated in his mind that everybody is equal. Like, everybody deserves to have the same chances and do the same things. So he fought for women's right to vote. If you look here, he worked with Elizabeth Stanton, attended the first ever Women's Right Convention in New York in 1848 and spoke out there about women having the right to vote, which is good. During the Civil War, he fought for the rights of black soldiers. Black soldiers were very often used in the Civil War, but sometimes they weren't given the greatest equipment. And he thought that wasn't very, very nice. And also, the South said they were going to start capturing black soldiers and either turning them into slaves or killing them. And so somehow, some way, this is how popular and famous Frederick Douglass was. Somehow, some way, he was able to speak with Abraham Lincoln, the president. And like, hey, Lincoln, like, this is what they're doing, and this is why it's not right. You have the power. You're the president. You need to do something about this. So Lincoln pretty much told them, if you capture a Union soldier and you harm them in any way, we're going to kill one of your soldiers in turn. Literally an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth there. And that's some pretty bold words, because even though they were fighting, there were rules in war. If you captured someone, you really weren't supposed to be overly mean to them in any way, because you understood, it was kind of like this understanding. We're both fighting in a war. We think we're doing what's right, so we respect the other side, even though if we're in war, I'm going to kill you. But if I capture you, I can't do anything bad. And I think that was pretty neat that he fought for equal pay and equal treatment of the Union soldier, or the Union soldiers as well. So that's it. Don't forget, Like and subscribe. Smash the like button.